Cheese! And we're back, boys. Good to see you,
Good
sir.
to be
Rid.
back. I feel like, just coming off the front lines. I'm exhausted, man.
I know,
I'm so tired.
You look tired, but I don't know. Is it not rewarding to come back after a hard? Is it not a good feeling to come back after a hard day of work, and that exhaustion is a good
I'd say
exhaustion?
it
I
was
feel.
a good exhaustion. And honestly, the most exhausting part is try to stay on top of the narrative of everything that's going down here. And I guess just for context, like, this is, what's the date today? Today's January 31st, 2022, and we spent the weekend downtown in Ottawa, just going around getting people's opinions as the trucker convoy rolled through. And I've got to admit, the people down there did all the heavy lifting. Like, our job was pretty easy, but still, like,
Amen.
exhausting, dude.
I think you're also I don't think you're not giving yourself enough credit, because I was pretty ignorant to the story. I think you started tracking it pretty much as soon as the new year broke, and it's one that I don't know. For some reason, it stuck out to you for some reason as to the one that's worthwhile of following. And then it was interesting to see how it just evolved and got bigger and slowly progressed to the point that this is where we are. And I don't know. It seems like you were able to really understand and get into it beyond just like the original articles.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we did it justice in that we saw it being a story evolving, even though maybe the legacy media kind of downplayed it a bit. And then, in the next session that we did, we talked about, how maybe the supply chain issues were being overplayed a little bit. And, those were front of mind at the get-go, but those kind of have dissolved into the background as this movement descended on Ottawa. And, it's just these two competing narratives that are going head to head, and
it's another us versus them that played out. I don't know. I'll tell you candidly, from when you had originally started tracking it, and you were really attached to it, and I was like, I'm not 100% certain as to why, and you articulated some of your points, and then they still went ahead with the mandate, and I was like, shit, well, there goes that story, but it was even. It was maybe more rewarding, or it came like I was like, man, Robbie's got a good nose to sniff that out, to be able to see how it picked up and evolved in the long run. And then when he told me what I want to say it was a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, where you're like, hey man, it's going to be here. So I've been tracking it so much so that I think we can get some boots on the ground and really start to understand it from a first person perspective and get some true objective data of having conversations. I was like, got a little bit jealous, got a little bit envious. So,
well, I mean, like, how often does something like this come to your backyard? Like, being from Ottawa, and even just being down there for a few days over the course of the weekend, I've never seen anything like that in Ottawa. And like, I've been downtown for Canada Day and like big events and stuff like that, and it paled in comparison in terms of like sheer volume of people there, as well as like the atmosphere. I've never felt anything like that before. It was kind of crazy, and I think it's kind of a nice homage to, postmodern.ca, living in the postmodern era and literally seeing these narratives fight it out on the battlefield of ideas. It's I don't know. It's crazy.
It's unrestricted warfare, some might say. I don't know. And seeing some of the content and some of the conversations you're able to capture, I know you had even way more than what I've been able to see. So I'm just now hearing some third party stories. You can also see, like, even through video, you can like feel the emotion from some of these people as well as yourself. And I hope more than just the people hear that, and the powers that be can try and have and invoke some sort of empathy and compassion and truly understand, like, well, why does this exist? What are people trying to say? And what's the intention behind this all at its purest form, and not let a bunch of filters in the way.
I mean, I'd certainly say that, that's being lost on both sides of the political spectrum. There hasn't been a whole lot of empathy, frankly.
Well, we'll see. So, I outlined a few questions for you just to get a sense of where your head's at and what you went through, and if anything, you can look at this as like a paid therapy session where you get to integrate it with your boy.
Well, I mean, why don't I just
Nick.
tell you what we did over the course of the last couple of days?
Yeah.
So, like, we
Please.
started Friday, so we went downtown Friday around like 5 o'clock. we were rolling down there, not entirely sure what to expect, not entirely sure if we're, going to be able to get the car down there. Managed to find a parking spot downtown, and like as soon as we got out of the car, you could hear the horns. You see the crowds of people. There were flags everywhere. High spirits, and we just kind of jumped into it right away. Started talking to people all the way up Rideau Street, talked to people all the way up to Parliament Hill. Called a wrap on that day to get ready for the next day, and on the Saturday. We hit the canal in the morning, skated down from around Fifth Avenue just down to the Rideau Center, and, got a couple of opinions along the way. That was like quite the sight to see as well. I mean, you had the trucks parked all along the canal. You had, supporters, the convoy, skating up and down the canal with their flags and their signs and stuff like that. It was just, it was kind of a wild scene to see. And we made it all the way down to the Rideau Center and moseyed around there a little bit, but we couldn't even really push through to get too close to, Parliament Hill. So we were kind of on the periphery there.
If you could estimate how many people you think showed out from Friday compared to Saturday.
Oh, it was night and day. Like Friday, there were a lot of people there. There were a lot of trucks already parked there. But Saturday was a whole other ball game. Like, it was wild.
And overall tone of the environment on Friday versus Saturday when you were engaging with these people as soon as you jumped into it.
Yeah, I mean, like on Friday, I think there was feelings? An air of anticipation. Like, no one really knew what to expect, but people were still excited and happy to be down there, happy to be taking part in this, and happy to be showing their support. Saturday was the same kind of sentiments, I want to say, but just like energy 10 times what it was on Friday.
And this was your first foray into this sort of thing. How are you feeling now before we jump into processing experience? You mentioned exhaustion, a hard day's work. Where do you think that emotion comes from? I know you're committed and you've been tracking the story and all that, but
this is the first time we've done any kind of on the street reporting journalism type stuff where we're actually there talking to the people and trying to distill what we're hearing to the masses. And it, like I said, it's something totally new to us, and it was stressful just to try to, like I said, just to try to stay on top of the narrative as it evolved, as you were on the scene. I mean, it was, adrenaline was like through the roof.
Peak.
Couldn't sleep over the course of the weekend, screen time at all-time highs, just, scrolling Twitter to make sure that we were staying on top of the story and stuff. And I'll just say that I think it's far from over as well.
It's just beginning. I mean, you got your first tip of a day in the life of Tim Pool, just a man that's on 24/7. You had many conversations. What would be your high and low of the experience, and what maybe did you take away from it that you didn't expect going in?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the high of the experience was the conversations themselves, and I think you can see it. Like, you can go check out our social pages and stuff like that, and watch the video interviews, but you could feel the emotion when these people were talking to you. There were several instances even where, people are on camera and they start choking up and, they have tears, and, guys are talking to me about how rough their financial situation is. And you could feel the hurt in these people, and that's why they're there. I feel like crying right now. Like, it was so moving to be down there and hear it from people. And, I wasn't necessarily expecting that. Like I said, I didn't know what to expect, but that moved me a lot.
It's interesting, just to quickly interject here, of the way I feel protests have been, protests on both sides and all aisles over the course have been projected as one full of maybe more negative or aggressive emotions of hate and fear and frustration and anger. And I don't know, it just maybe seems more divisive, whereas in sharing and seeing and hearing your perspective and your experience, it seems like it was, yeah, sure, maybe one of sadness, but also one of like people longing for connection
Totally.
and acceptance and
Totally.
just like connection, if
That's
you will, like
that's
intimate.
exactly what it was.
Intimacy.
It was people who, for the last 2 years, thought that they were alone in the opinions that they held, and the last couple of weeks just unveiled to them that there are thousands of people just like them or hurting like them who hold opinions like them, and I think what you've seen is it started a global conversation about this.
It's timely too. It was shortly after a lot of the worldwide protests. I think it was on the 23rd. So good on the truckers for, it's a big commitment to drive across the country.
Yeah.
Low though. I know you said you're tired and frustrated.
No,
What,
but
were there any lows of the experience?
Take that as a badge of honor, being gassed after such a long weekend. But one of the lows from me was, and like I said, it was an overwhelmingly positive atmosphere, but there were certain times where there were people, I guess, counter-protesting the movement, and not even like demonstrating. These are people, like grown women skating on the canal, who like flagged down a family who was walking with children, and they had their flags going into the protest. Flagged them down, like waved them down, like hey, look, like over here, and then just flipped them off, like stuck middle fingers at them. And like these are grown adults flipping off a family. Like it is what it is, but like that was disappointing to see. But I don't know. I guess every crowd has its crazies, right?
Yeah, every crowd, fair. No, that's really sad. I don't know. I think it is, like, ideology aside and wherever we stand aside, is that can't we just all remember that we're still humans at the end of it all?
Yeah.
And like, you have your opinions, I have my opinions, and we can just like live and let be. Did you expect all of what happened? Like, or did you have any expectations running into it, or you just kind of freeballed and said, let's see what happens?
Well, the only expectation we had was, chaos. Like, we didn't know what the scene was going to look like when we got down there. So, we just kind of hoped for the best. And I think, had some pretty good results in terms of, getting some pretty, meaningful commentary from people.
Do you find that there was, to play devil's advocate, do you find that there was a bit of confirmation bias in terms of like the reason and the why behind you going down there, like knowing the stances that we hold and what we believe in? How did you approach trying to come across as unbiased as possible when you ask people to be on camera and share their opinion? You obviously want them to express themselves fully and truly. How'd you try and manage that so that you
that's a fair question. And I think like just by virtue of, the arena that we were going to, you're most likely going to get some skewed talking points, right? Like people are there downtown in support of this movement. Most likely the people you interview are going to be, supporters of that movement. So, I mean, what we did was we tried to, like on the Saturday, we tried to hang out on the periphery and get the average person's opinion. And throughout every quick discussion that we had, we asked the exact same questions. Like, what have you seen so far? What have you heard from people? Like, how has the atmosphere been? What do you think of the pandemic policies that we've seen over the last couple of years? And, what do you expect to come out of this weekend? So, there wasn't necessarily like a slant or anything like that to the questions we were asking. And it just so happens that, the people that were more keen to be on camera were, the people that were there to make a statement.
But what's wild, even though that you did find, and I'll jump to another one soon because it leads us there. But even the people that you captured and shared in that video, it's still a pretty wide spectrum of
it is
perspectives and understandings of what they see the picture
as.
But
I wish you could have been there to see all of the people that we spoke to, because the people who made it on camera and were willing to talk on camera were, I don't know, maybe like I want to say like a 20th of the people we actually talked to. Like people were very, very reluctant to come on camera in the first place. Like the way we did it was we just kind of struck up casual conversations and kind of got perspectives going, and then we said, hey, we're filming something here, would you like to say a few words on camera? And like almost immediately everyone just ran away. So we had a pretty low hit rate just in terms of getting people in front of the actual camera, but the sentiment was very, very strong. And what was funny as well is what we heard a lot is right out of the gates, you're not CBC or CTV, are you? Like there was such an air of distrust of legacy media that, I think that actually played a role in, people not wanting to come on camera and share their perspectives.
Young and old people alike?
Like even more so the older people who are, kind of established in their careers. Half the people we spoke to were government employees who said, they spilled their hearts out and then just said, yeah, I can't go on film because, I work for the government and I'm afraid to lose my job.
That's sad. Like, to me, that's sad because it's like, evidently they have a lot of emotions and opinions and beliefs as to so much so that it inspired action for them to come out and demonstrate and protest. But they feel censored and silenced and muffled to the point that like, hey, I can't truly be who I want to be or say how I want to feel and project how I want to project.
I mean, yeah, like in all fairness, like people were very open in the first place, just kind of laying it all out on the line in the conversations we had. But, a lot of people were just kind of reluctant to, have their face on camera and say it, Do
you think that, do you get a feeling that these conversations are held at the dinner table, at their respective dinner tables, or like this is their coming out party almost?
To a certain extent, but I think what you saw a lot of is, a forum for people who want to voice those opinions and don't necessarily have those opportunities to speak their minds.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was funny at the end of it all, where you text me like, dude, I feel like a salesperson. Where you had to go up and to get that hit rate, to get those emotions, get those reactions. I don't know. It takes a lot of grit and resilience.
Yeah, and like me, I'm more of an introvert than anything, so I think that's partly why I feel so exhausted just talking to so many people and getting rejected.
But I mean, it's a cross to bear.
Yeah.
So much so, it's important that I think what you captured and documented and produced, at least the people that were kind enough to dedicate the time to even have the conversation, whether they record it or not. I mean, they can reflect back on it and be like, hey, I know that mustachio, it was so bad. It wasn't so, it wasn't what it's portrayed to be, if you will, from some of the mainstream.
And I mean, what I'll say as well is like people were super articulate and had a lot to say. Like I was blown away with some of the stuff that people were saying.
Do you want to, do I dare ask, like, how
I mean, you can go check it out on the social pages, but the gentleman Adam from Sarnia, I basically did a quick intro with him, and then he just went for like 2 minutes and like beautifully articulate, spoke his mind, got his points across, and it was encouraging to see that.
It's like people have been like, I don't know, maybe I heard it from Lex talking about Russian literature, where he's just saying a part of Russian literature and why it's so beautiful is that it's also been a nation state that's been under so much tyranny. So when there's so much tyranny and people are oppressed, it's like beautiful ideas, beautiful words, beautiful language, beautiful music is generated within. And then when you get an opportunity and even a slight glimmer of hope to like express that, that's why you see so much beautiful Russian literature and music.
These people all had something to say, and like I'm happy that we could give them a platform to say it.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's give the platform to you, good sir. You interviewed and got many perspectives. One of the questions that you stuck up and asked each of them to get different ideas. What would you say to our policy leaders? Knowing the information that you got, and also seeing how maybe a day later, it's starting to transpire, play out. What are you feeling? What do you want to say to them if you had the opportunity?
If I had the platform to say something, I would say that this is not a movement that you can discount and, kind of throw off to the side and kind of tarnish by associating, discrete, unfortunate events that may or may not have happened downtown, and like using that to smear the whole movement. What I saw being there and talking to people, and, I posted about this and wrote an article about this, is that this was a grassroots, working class, blue collar Canadian movement. And, these are people that, maybe aren't pulling in great salaries. They're working crazy hours. And, these are the people who the pandemic policies have affected the most. And they have no other recourse at this point. Like one of the conversations I had was with the guy named Douglas from Curve Lake First Nation north of Peterborough. And I mean, like, that pulls on the heartstrings, man. Like, if you listen to that interview, you can feel the emotion. And working class Canadians across the country are really suffering. And they're dying to be heard, and they're being ignored and slandered. So I think the one thing that we have to say to our policymakers in all of this is that, there's a whole subset of the Canadian populace that feels left behind and disadvantaged because of some of the policy decisions that have been made over the last couple of years. And yeah.
No, I was gonna say you texted me earlier on this, and I haven't had time to think on it further, but I imagine you've been mulling over it. Have you drew parallels of what Canada's going through now versus what the States might have gone through 5 years ago in 2016 of that populist movement?
Yeah, and I mean, like, putting the like Trump meme aside, what was underlying that whole movement was essentially a working class base of Americans who had been sold out by prior administrations and were looking for radical change. And I think you're seeing that same kind of movement building in Canada. And you're seeing almost like a color revolution happening on the grounds of Parliament right now.
And I would say it's not even like a left to right Republican or Republican or Democrat conversation of, I don't know, I feel as if you could have a similar tone 2008 and Obama getting elected in 2016 and it's that the institution and the way it's set up has yet to really advocate for the people, and wherever you kind of lie is that, I don't know, man, genuinely listen to who you're representing. I don't know. I often reflect and come back to that, like, hey, government works for us. We don't work for the government in any way, shape, or form. So I would encourage you to challenge the people that are rightfully your employees, not the other way around.
Yeah. And I think what's important to talk about is the impacts that these pandemic policies have had. And I think the biggest impact is that it has basically decoupled the rich and the elite from the working class. If you own assets, if you own IP, if you own stock, if you own real estate, you became more wealthy during this pandemic because the central banks printed with no regard and assets inflated. So if you owned a home, you got wealthier. If you own stock, you got wealthier. If you were poor, you got left out of the biggest bull market of all time. And what do you do now?
Well, what's our role then? I mean, we're from the privileged laptop class. We're producing a podcast from our respective abodes without having to truly put in that blue-collared work ethic, if you will. Like, what would you want to tell and share with your peers to be able to ideally inspire positive change or something that might help mitigate some of the suffering?
I think first and foremost, recognizing that this is a working class movement. And like I said, and have been saying, this is a class issue more than anything. And I think that's what you're seeing the politicians try to get away from, casting it as, a race issue and being a white nationalist thing and whatever it may be. It detracts from the fact that this stems from the massive inequalities that have been driven from these pandemic policies. Like, I think it was mid last year, over half of Canadians were within like $200 of not being able to cover their bills. You know, like that's not good. You know, and as central banks continue to inflate, middle class Canadians are borrowing more than ever just to maintain that era of like a middle class lifestyle, and it's not sustainable. And you know, if you think things are bad now, when this market turns around and people rush for the door, it's going to be like people are going to get hit so bad.
Well, all the more reason why it's just like this movement isn't important. Like, it's not one to just brush aside, and the answer is, well, you should go get vaccinated, and then this will all wash away.
It's not about that. It really isn't. Like, you know, it may be in a sense about, you know, government overreach and, you know, these mandates and lockdowns stifling productivity and, you know, preventing people from making a wage to feed their families. But the more I reflect on it, and, you know, the more I think about it, and the more I watch those interviews back, you know, this is a class revolution. This is a labor revolution.
Man, doom and gloom.
Is it doom and gloom though? Because I think, you know, we're on the brink right now, or in the midst of right now, a political revolution worldwide. And, you know, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say that. You don't have to look very far to see the protests. And I think, you know, the ruling elite in the West, in Europe, in Asia, in the Middle East, you know, they've sold out their populations and, like I said, decoupled from the working class citizens. And so I think what you'll see is a political revolution towards populism. But the question is, are we going to see national populism, like nationalist populism with economic nationalism and economic populism? Or are we going to see more of like a socialist populism, like a Bernie Sanders type populism, you know? Because you look at take the Trump analogy again, you know, there was the same kind of sentiment within the same kind of, you know, demographic of people, and some found the solution in Trump, some found it in Sanders. But at the end of the day, the core sentiment was the same. You know, it was, let's move priority from the shareholder value to the citizen value. Let's let the little guy have a share of the pie. Let's let the little guy play in the game. Let's let the little guy have good jobs. Let's bring the jobs back, you know? Like, that is the sentiment that we saw in the States in 2016, and that I think we're seeing here in Canada now.
And I think all the more reason why, like, irrespective of where you fall on the aisle, like, if that hits close to home for you, would be like, hey, drop the politics and drop the divisive bantering, if you will, to, like, talk about the real issue at hand, because I think it's kind of pretty glaring in our face now. It's never been one about public health and public policy. There's something larger at play. Yeah. So you told me this, because I often try and get in the weeds with people, because I always try and poke holes and attack or be on the offense in some ways. Just like Nicky, as soon as you get into the weeds and details of like this versus that, is you're missing the grand picture, if you will. On that, I mean, I've seen even the interview, you caught some people who I think are very, we'll say, smaller and ignorant into what they know and experience. Like, I'm just here because I'm here, I'm a university student, I figured I could participate and just wanted to see what it is. And you saw some other people there on the polar extreme. What interactions stood out to you? What conversations are you still processing that, obviously you didn't expect any of these, but that you were trying to understand better?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously that one first brief conversation with Douglas there was like, he poured his heart out to us.
That was the first
conversation we had,
one?
And you know, we introduced ourselves, had a brief chat, and then he just went. Like, we didn't even say anything. He just went and he poured his heart out, and you could feel the emotions. And like, that one pulled on the heartstrings for sure. One of the other conversations that we had was with a husband and wife duo who are coming in from Chatham, Kent, and they own and operate a strawberry farm out there. And you know, this gentleman that we spoke to was like beautifully articulate. He laid out all of his perspectives on the line, and what he was saying was that he was an immigrant to this country 30 years ago, absolutely devastated by the way that this country is being run and the direction that it's headed, and the future that's been painted for him and his family and his children, and said that on the way in on the 401, he's never felt that way in his entire life, saying that, I've never seen so many Canadian flags. And, as he was telling me that, he started crying. And, you could just feel the emotion, and you could see and feel the hurt that these people have. And, we wrapped up the interview, and then the gentleman's wife approached us and laid her heart out on the line. And, she started crying, and you could see the emotion in her eyes, and you could feel it. It was like it was super powerful. And, hopefully that we can do some follow-ups, and because we got, exchanged contact information, and I'd love to have a deeper conversation with them and, kind of unpack a lot of what we heard over the weekend.
Oh, very much so. I would imagine the immigrant story is one that's compelling for many people, whether you live the immigrant experience or you think it's a net positive for our society and diversity. Is that, like, I don't know, I get a feeling of all the people that you kind of spoke to, and even the sentiment going in, is that I almost feel like it's a forgotten class or a forgotten people, as to, for the last 2 years, we haven't been able to process nor share our genuine feelings, or if we have, we've been quickly slandered and maybe not radicalized, but become a fringe movement. Is it a couple of the interviews? It's not an acute protest. This is something that's in it for the long term. Of the truckers that you saw there, how committed would you say they looked? Like, what did you sense they were? What were they there for? Because they're obviously risking their wages and not producing for their respective shipping companies. How long do you think?
I would say that, like, most people that we saw that were there are most likely like independent owner operators. So, they weren't putting their companies at risk, so to speak. Yeah. But I mean, the overwhelming sentiment and the recurring thing that we heard was, we want to have an end to these restrictive lockdown policies and mandates so that we can just get back to our lives. Like, that was it. Go back and listen to the interviews. What it boils down to is, leave us alone and let us get back to living our lives. Like, that's all these people want.
Is that too much to ask
Apparently.
for? Damn. Were there any? What was the happiest story that you got from that? And happy, not in the sense of inspiring, because I think there are many inspiring conversations. Just like, was there any humor in all of this? Like, I saw some funny signs. I saw on the camera there's one, "A govern me harder, daddy." But what was the biggest cackle you got there?
I don't know. Like, I would just, like, there's not one particular moment that, like, stands out to me, but, people were just in good spirits, joking around with each other, having a good time. Like, it was a party more than anything, really. Like, you could smell the pot in the air. People were drinking, like, having barbecues in front of Parliament. Like, they're there for the long haul, man.
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure I heard a Traeger going in the background as some wood pellets just dribbling.
Like, one of the
through.
guys there had like, half the trucks that were parked in front of Parliament, like, a good number of them, I would say, were like RVs and campers. Like, these people are here for the long haul. One of them was like a cabin on stilts that was just parked there. Like, these people don't plan on leaving anytime soon. And, it's really upsetting to think about, but this is only just getting started, and I'm really afraid that it's going to get ugly. Like, I'm really, really afraid that it's going to turn ugly.
Yeah. Why do you say that? Is just
I would say that
how the government initially
I would say
reacted?
Because I've never seen such strong conviction in, the people participating in this movement. And from what I saw, they had very broad support from, all walks of life. Everyone was getting behind this movement. And, what we heard today from the Prime Minister in his press conference, I think, demonized a lot of them and, cast them aside as if they, had no, no right to be there in the first place. And kind of tried to cast them all as racist and violent and all that. And I think the other part that's going to come into play, and I really hope it doesn't, is that on the CBC the other day, there was a segment, and I think it was with the transport minister, and he was saying, we have plans in the works right now to implement the mandates for truckers interprovincially. So think about the uproar that's going to cause if people are still in Ottawa protesting the Canadian border mandates for truckers, and then they come around and implement this interprovincial one. And in the same breath, that minister said we're considering updating the definition of fully vaccinated to 3 shots. So think about the reaction that'll generate, and think about how these people will feel, when they've traveled all across the country to be here and have their voices heard, and they essentially just get slapped in the face.
I just don't understand how, if your job, in effect, is to get voted into office, you can see this as a fringe, and unfortunately, that's the way the system is, where I'll spend more time campaigning and trying to make sure I hold my position as opposed to fighting for things that I think my constituents believe and care for. Seeing what you saw, and even if you were just in Parliament and you heard it, you just open your door, you would hear more than a fringe. It's just how do you see this as a productive or conducive to you getting reelected? I don't know, man.
Well, I mean, I think there's so much risk attached to coming out and voicing your support for something like this, just with the prospect of it, potentially turning violent at some point. I don't know how it's going to shake out, but, you got to think these politicians are trying to hedge their bets and mitigate their reputational risk by coming out and supporting them. So I applaud the politicians who have come out from the early days and shown their support and recognize that this is a working class blue collar movement and they deserve to be heard. And, if nothing happens, then it's only going to make the issue worse.
What's the real risk of censorship in society? What's the real risk of if we were speaking a few weeks ago on education and universities, and we're just saying I think university is a place whereby you should have your ideas challenged. That's the one place, the one last safe space, if you will, before you head off into the real world.
I think you're seeing the risk of censorship being played out in real time in front of us, in that there are 2 truths that exist right now, and nothing beyond those 2 truths, right? And so when there's no room for dialogue, how can you ever expand on that?
Dude, it's when I read 1984 for the first time in elementary school, and then now, I'm just oh, it's crazy fiction. Would never anticipate or feel like I could see some of this, but picking it up a few years, it's fucking frightening. It's fucking why, people? Why? There are so many different ways about this that it's just a matter of just being open to alternatives beyond just the 2 that are presented in front of us, and think a little bit past the surface level. Last one then for you, man. What were you thinking about going to bed last night? Did you close your eyes tired, exhausted? What were your closing thoughts and closing remarks before your consciousness got to reset and you got to be all right, let's try again tomorrow and see what happens?
I think it was honestly, it was sadness, because, we went and had these conversations, and, I formed my own opinion about, why people were there, and, the motivations that brought them halfway across the country, and the cause that they're standing there to support. And, to see the other narrative develop around, it being a fringe, unacceptable opinions, racist, white nationalist, you name it. Like, it was so sad, and it just made me realize that, in this postmodern era, you're never going to have another one of these, protest movements without it being co-opted and slandered like this, because, we live in an era where there's a 24/7 information war going on right now. And so it's upsetting that, the perspectives that I heard haven't been able to really kind of cut through that noise. It's been, I don't know. It's just been a kind of a tough one to digest. And, I think
it's like
one of the other things I'll say is that it feels to me like the political elite are scared. Like, they didn't expect this. Like I was saying, much like, there was a surprise win in 2016. I don't think that the political elite expected the turnout like this. I don't think they expected the broad-based support. I don't think they were ready for it, from a communications perspective, from, like a political strategy perspective. And, it doesn't just go for the Liberal Party, it goes for the Conservative Party as well. Because, there are, I could count the Conservative MPs on one hand who have, stood up for freedoms as the people in the convoy would define them. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And like Polyev is one who stands out. Leslie Lewis was another who stands out. But, these were courageous MPs who stood up and supported these people. And, I think there's going to be a political reckoning in the coming years, because I don't think the Conservative Party recognized that, this was a potential base for them.
Well, all the more reason for people, the masses, to like timestamp this. January 31st. This is what the world was. This is what was going on. These were the feelings, these were the sentiments, because I feel like you're going to see, because they were so caught off guard, like you're seeing in many different narratives around the world right now. There's like a scrambling of like trying to cobble together a narrative that still makes sense when so much of different things have fallen through.
Just on that point, while you say it, I think what we see too is that like there are people in this world that still believe the institutional narratives, and there are people in this world that don't recognize those institutional narratives as true anymore. And I think that's where you see kind of like the biggest divide in terms of ideology.
Well, then don't forget that, is because like what would be a shame is like all this effort, this emotion and energy that gets invested into momentum, not even a movement, just the momentum in this pendulum, is that like they'll push back hard. Like they took 2 years to work, and much longer than 2 years if you go back further, of trying to understand and grasp this power and this influence. So when there's threat, and you threaten any sort of creature, it's going to get on the defense, and it might lash back out. So I don't know, man. I think it's super important just to like remember the emotion, remember where you're at, remember what you were genuinely feeling, and then moving forward, just act with compassion, act with empathy, and remember, people love people, and we're just trying to build community. And if you see a force that's going against that, question it. You don't have to provide the answers. Just have some curiosities, have some skepticism. And then you might be able to have engaging conversations like what you did over the weekend, where people just wanted to share their thoughts without feeling marginalized.
Exactly, man. And like I said, people have a lot to say. So, I mean, I think we're going to try to get back out there and, try to humanize some of these people who have been, frankly, slandered in the media, and, try to give a voice to these people. Because I think if people start catching on to what we've been saying, how this is like a grassroots, blue-collar, working-class Canadian movement, then I can't see this being stopped.
Amen. I think we'll leave it there, good sir.
Right on, man. Good to chat, and look forward to keeping you updated.
I look forward to following along, and like when you get your black belt in martial arts, just begin.
Yes, sir.
Real journey starts.
All right, mate.
All right.